We begin with the topic of resisting temptations and fasting. We'll read some Quran first for blessings. Bismillah.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والضحى والليل إذا سجى ما ودعك ربك وما قلى وللآخرة خير لك من الأولى ولسوف يؤتيك ربك فترضى ألم يجدك يتيما فآوى ووجدك ضالا فهدى ووجدك عائلا فأغنى فأما اليتيم فلا تقهر وأما السائل فلا تنهر وأما بنعمة ربك فحدث صدق الله العظيم.
Sadaqallahu al-Azim.
MashaAllah.
Okay, now let's begin the topic. So, today we're going to discuss resisting the nafs, fighting the nafs and resisting temptations. So now, first we must ask, what is Islam? Islam, what does it linguistically mean? Does anybody know? Okay, brother Mu'ayyid.
Submitting your soul to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
MashaAllah. So it is the submission of oneself to basically God's will to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And basically, so that means we must obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in order to submit to Him. And the nafs is that part of us, it's that component, which is our ego in itself, which is that part of us which wants to go against that, which wants to for example, do acts of haram. For example, whether that be speaking to women, struggling to basically lower our gaze, whether that be, for example, wanting to do sin, whether that be, for example, having jealousy and envying. These are all things which our nafs is basically pushing us to do, and kind of like trying to convince us to do. However, in order to be good Muslims, in order to submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we must fight against this. And basically in hadith, it talks about how there's this actually a form of a physical struggle, where that when we basically have a physical fight in terms of, for example, jihad, this is the fight in terms of our physical fight and how we fight fi sabilillah. But this is an external fight. There's also an inward fight, and the fight within our own hearts, and how we, for example, purify ourselves so we basically become good Muslims, where we basically do the righteous things, where we have good morals, we have good etiquette, we have a good adab. Basically, this is kind of like further added, where in Tirmidhi, it's labeled as a Hasan hadith. Talks about the fight in Allah's path is the one who strives against his nafs, and in other hadiths talks about in obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which, as we said, submitting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is something we should take into account, that though there's also a physical fight and basically the fight in terms of an external manner and an external way, there's also an inward fight, a fight where we kind of have to preserve our Islam, preserve our deen, preserve our faith, and basically resist against our nafs, our temptations, and the things that basically we're kind of like motivated to do despite knowing that they are wrong. In Islam, there's also this concept of al-fitra, which is God-given consciousness, where we will know that a lot of sins will kind of have guilt for them. For example, when someone misses salah, then maybe they'll be like, why did we miss salah? Or for example, when someone steals, they'll have guilt afterwards. Well, and for many sins, there's a sense of guilt then after. But then what happens if we fall victim to our desires and our temptations? What can we do? The Holy Prophet says in this hadith, it's reported in Tirmidhi's Hasan Sahih, قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم اتق الله حيثما كنت واتبع السيئة الحسنة تمحها وخالق الناس بخلق حسنة. Fear Allah wherever you are and follow up a bad deed with a good deed. Meaning, even if you do fall victim of your desires and your temptations and you do commit a sin, then it does not mean everything's over. It doesn't mean you have failed. It means that you should try and correct your amal, correct your actions, and try to basically right your wrong with a right and a good deed. And this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says and asks from us. And then it also goes on to say that basically by doing this, we will also treat people with good morals. When we try and basically fight our nafs, it will also encourage us to be good people, and this is what we should do. And in the Quran, it says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He also forgives those who, for example, do the goodness after when they do it wrong, and those who repent as well, who do tawbah. وَإِنِّي لَغَفَّارٌ لِمَنْ تَابَ وَآمَنَ وَعَمِلَ صَالِحًا ثُمَّ اهْتَدَى. And this is in Surah Al-Taha. It talks about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, He is the forgiver who repents, forgiver for those who repent and believes, and those who command righteousness and then remain guided. Meaning, when you do a sin, when you fall victim of your nafs, then you should try and do tawbah, ask Allah for forgiveness. Remember what you did is wrong, and correct your actions. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala He says. And there's a final hadith which will say on the authority of Abu Abbas rahimahullah. He says, جاء رجل إلى النبي فقال يا رسول الله دلني على عمل إذا عملته أحبني الله وأحبني الناس فقال ازحد على الدنيا يحبك الله وازحد فيما عند الناس يحبك الناس. What does this mean? It means that in the hadith, a man came to the Holy Prophet ﷺ and he said, O Prophet, direct me to an action which, when I have done it, Allah will love me and the people will love me. The Holy Prophet then replied, be indifferent to the world in terms of its pleasures, and Allah will love you, and be indifferent towards people in terms of what they have and what they possess, and the people will love you. Meaning that to be, for example, good Muslims and fit in our society, we should not be, for example, concerned about what others are doing, and we should also just kind of like focus on ourselves. And then we'll also avoid some of the sins, for example, being jealous. Once we do not care about what anybody else has, we forget, for example, sins like jealousy and envy, and stuff like this. We should focus on ourselves, and then we also remember where we should be indifferent to the dunya as a whole. We should forget about it. In another hadith, it talks about how the person who feeds on the dunya is described as a dead corpse, and the person that feeds on it is like the dog who scavenges for basically like a dead corpse. So we should remember that this dunya is only temporary, it's only material. It will not come into the afterlife with us. It's only our a'mal and our good deeds and bad deeds that will stay with us. So this is what we need to remember. This hadith which I've just said is graded as Hasan by Ibn Majah. And we will finish with this part of the Quran. تريدون عرض الدنيا والله يريد الآخرة. Meaning that as humans and as insan, that it is natural for us to basically lust for the dunya, basically kind of like be motivated to basically do stuff for the dunya, whether that be getting a good job, whether that be to get good money, to basically get things which will only benefit us here. But only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He will want those things for us in the akhirah, because He knows that the akhirah will last, this dunya will not. And this shows how Allah has love for us, and by listening to Allah we will achieve great success, not by following our nafs. Sadaqallahu al-Azim. And we finish Iqamah to Salah.